Like most priests, I usually preach my sermon on the gospel passage, but not today. Or sometimes one of the other Bible readings. Today I would like to focus our thoughts on the opening prayer, the collect, that began our service this morning. O God, the strength of all who put their trust in you, mercifully accept our prayers, and because in our weakness we can do nothing good without you, give us the help of your grace, that in keeping your commandments we may please you both in will and deed. Give us the help of your grace. We talk about God's grace a lot. We even call the prayer that we say over food grace. But I think it might be helpful to offer a bit of a definition of what exactly God's grace is all about. To do that, let me tell you a story about someone who learned firsthand what God's grace can mean. In 1735, a young boy ran away from boarding school in the south of England. Johnny had been sent there because his mother died when he was 7, and his father was a shipping merchant who was away at sea for months on end. By the age of 11, the boy had had quite enough of school, where he was frequently punished for rebellious behavior. So Johnny became a seaman on his father's ship, where he quickly adopted the wanton, sinful life of a sailor. He became notorious for disobedience and was whipped many times. He cursed like a sailor, as the saying goes, but even worse. He was famous for inventing new and more shocking forms of profanity and for writing obscene poems about the ship's captain, much to the delight of the crew. He was pressed into the British Navy for his misdeeds, and he frequently went absent without leave, always receiving a lashing when he was caught. At one point, his behavior was so bad that he was actually abandoned in Sierra Leone and made a slave. He was only rescued when he wrote to his father and begged forgiveness. And although he was brought up by his mother as a Methodist, he renounced his Christian faith and became a very vocal denier of God and Christ. Eventually, he became captain of his own ship in the slave trade. One day in March 1748, his ship was in a terrible storm. All hands were below decks, waiting out the worst. He picked up a book, The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. Reading this book ultimately changed his life, but at that time, only a seed was planted. You see, unlike Peter and Andrew, James and John, who heard Jesus' call and immediately left their old ways to follow him, the young captain tried first to become a compassionate master of the ship and a humane slave trader. Humane slave trader. Finally, he could no longer bear his ship and his career. He returned to marry his childhood sweetheart. He found a job working as a clerk in the seaport of Liverpool in England. But he found his faith, and he felt called to preach the gospel. He studied Latin, Greek, and theology diligently, encouraged by no less a person than John Wesley himself, the founder of Methodism. However, knowing the young man's sordid history, the archbishop refused to ordain him. John had written a book about his conversion, his former sinful life, and the faith and life that he now had. And that book was read by an influential English lord who arranged for him to be ordained a priest in London at the age of 39. He took up a parish in the city of Olney near Cambridge. His ministry was both typical and not so typical. He served as a faithful priest to his parish, but he also preached in any large building that he could rent on any evening of the week. An unheard of practice for the Anglican clergy in the 1770s. Another unusual practice for him and his congregation was that they sang hymns that were not found in the standard Church of England hymnal of that time. John believed that simple, heartfelt faith was best expressed in simple words and melodies, rather than the plain song or chant of the Church of England. And so he adopted the practice of writing a new song to accompany every one of his sermons. Imagine trying to do that. I don't think I'd want to take that on. Finally, they were gathered together into what was called the Olney Hymnal, and the cover of your bulletin has the title page of that hymnal, a photograph of that on it. So I thought I'd give you that today so you can see what we're talking about. It was named the Olney Hymnal for his parish. It quickly, however, spread all over England and became very popular. One of his most prominent preaching themes was to tell the story of his own life, how he had been a sinner, one of the very worst, since he had dealt in human slavery. Without his willing it or doing anything to bring about it, he had been converted back to Jesus Christ. It took him many years to find his way to the special ministry to which he had been called. He spent the last 28 years of his life as pastor of a large church in central London, and many influential people flocked to hear his sermons and sing his hymns. When he preached, he often told the story of being lost at sea in a storm, which symbolized to him being adrift in the world, tossed about in another kind of storm, without faith or guidance. He told how Jesus had found him and opened his eyes to the right path of living and had called him to minister. And our runaway boy, rowdy, profane sailor, slave ship captain, and Anglican preacher John Newton wrote the words of the hymn we just sang, Amazing Grace. His example shows us how the grace of God works. Unexpected, undeserved, unearned, impossible to earn, but always persistent, tugging at us, calling us back whenever we turn away. John Newton almost met death at sea, at the cruel hand of violent nature, perhaps more than once. He saw his rescue as God's grace, a free gift. His life was changed through no act or will of his own. God touched him. There was no other way for him to explain it. Once, shortly before he died, John Newton was preaching, and he seemed to forget what he was going to say. I am sure that will happen to me many times. So he looked up at his congregation and exclaimed, "My memory is nearly gone, but I remember two things, that I am a great sinner and that Christ is a great Savior." Humanity has come through many dangers, toils, and snares, and will come through many more, I'm sure. But only by the grace of God, a free, completely undeserved gift that we can't earn, can't demand, can't ask for, but can only accept with humble gratitude. My prayer for us today is this: may we be beacons of hope in this sad world. May we witness by our lives, our words, our deeds, to the loving power of God to save us. May we tell the story of the power of grace unsought, grace of which we are unworthy, grace that found us when we were lost and brought us comfort, not just for 1,000 years, but for all eternity.